Good afternoon and welcome to this, our second webinar hosted by White Peak Farmers Facilitation Group. We're lucky enough to have received funding from the South West Peak Landscape Partnership Scheme to run these sessions through our Networks for Nature Facilitating Collaborative Farming project. And we're very pleased to have Defra joining us today to give us an insight into the Environmental Land Management Scheme. I'm going to shortly hand over to Brian MacDonald from Natural England, who'll be chairing our session today. But before I do, I just want to go over some housekeeping. Just to mention that we have muted everyone and everybody's videos will remain off throughout the webinar. We are recording the webinar and we'll be making it available afterwards, and we'll share this link with you after the event at some time. Just to reassure you, your screens will not be visible in this recording. If you want to change the way that you're viewing the webinar, you can do so by going to the top of your right hand, to the right of your screen at the top. You'll be able to change the way that you view it on the view menu. We'll be answering questions again at the end of the presentations, but please don't wait until then. We're using the chat function that you can see at the bottom of your screen. Just type into the box there any questions that you might have that come up throughout the webinar today, and then we'll put those questions to our presenters. If you've got any problems at all with the technology, then please just again put that in the chat, and Liz, who's helping us out today, will be able to try and help with any problems. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over to Brian then, and look forward to the presentations.
Thanks, Anne, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm Brian MacDonald, as Anne's just introduced me. I've helped set up the Facilitation Fund, and I've been working with that over the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm pleased to say that we've established over 135 farmer groups in that time, and I hope a number of them are with us today to share their successes and input to what I hope is an enjoyable, informative session around the future scheme. We had around just 270 folk who had indicated they're joining us today. I don't think we've quite got that number here, but a significant number of people are, just under 150. And I hope we have sufficient time and brain power to make the most of our time here today. By way of introduction, I think, you know, this is a very interesting time we're living in. Just events yesterday with the opening of Parliament and the Queen's speech, particularly the reference to the Environment Bill and the new legislation that brings forward is genuinely exciting, and I think helps to bring forward a lot of the aspirations and ambition that was mooted in the 25-year plan to life. A number of those things are directly relevant to how we shape up with land management in the future. In particular, things like conservation covenants, net gain, nature recovery are all things that are looming large in the new and exciting agenda that we're hoping to step up to. So land use and ecosystem restoration, how we adapt to climate change, and how we use our collective collaboration to recover from COVID and also address the future challenges around climate change are really important times. So I'm delighted to say we've got Alan Brown, who's head of policy for local nature recovery in Defra, and Louise Maguire, who's been leading on the tests and trials for Defra over the last few years. And I think hopefully we'll address what I think is the biggest show in town in regard to future developments with the Future Farm Scheme. Before I hand over to Ellen to begin the presentation, I'd just like to thank Anne, Liz, the South West Peak Farmers and the Heritage, the National Lottery for supporting this. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Ellen. If you're ready, Ellen, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Brian. Can I just check, can everyone see and hear me? Because I think someone just said in the chat they couldn't see Brian.
That might be a fortunate thing.
Can see and hear. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Great, we're all good, perfect. Right, well, again, yeah, thanks to Anne and Liz and Brian for inviting me along today. It's great to be able to talk to more farmers, especially when we've been stuck at home for a year. It's quite a trial. I'm going to try and share my screen. I'm unfortunately technically challenged, so hopefully this goes all right. Everyone can see that one? Hopefully that's okay. Great. So as Brian said, I'm the head of local nature recovery policy, one of the new environmental land management schemes. So I'm conscious that probably a lot of you have heard quite a lot about environmental land management over the past year or so. So I've got a presentation, I'll run through it probably a little bit quicker than I would for people who are brand new to it, but really, really happy to take questions at the end. I know some people have submitted them already, and also you're going to be putting them in the chat. So hopefully we can have a really good discussion, and I'm really, really interested in hearing your views as we go along. So, here we go, struggling already. So going right back to the start, everyone knows, and we've left the EU, which is an amazing opportunity to shape English agricultural policy to better suit our agricultural needs and also for the environment. So to that end, we're introducing 3 schemes that reward environmental benefits. And we'll make those changes over a 7-year transition period from 2021 to 2027. Hopefully you've all seen that in November we published the Path to Sustainable Farming, which is about the agricultural transition plan focusing on 2021 to 2024. So there's an awful lot of information in there, not only about environmental land management, but about the wider future farming policy and how we're going to work on that policy over the next few years. This is our vision for future farming. It's about public money to reward environmental benefits, building on so much of the amazing work that we already know is done by farmers across the country to look after the environment. It's making sure that we do that alongside a thriving, self-reliant and resilient farming sector, and really working on improving the relationship between farmers and government, and also not forgetting alongside that world-class animal welfare standards is something that the UK prides itself on, and something that we very much want to continue. These are the environmental public goods that I'm sure you've all heard about, that we've said that future schemes will help to deliver. So that's clean and plentiful water, clean air, protection from and mitigation of environmental hazards, mitigation of and adaptation to climate change, thriving plants and wildlife, and beauty, heritage, and engagement. We think that protection and enhancement of our environment is really the preeminent public good in terms of the value that it provides for the public, for farmers, land managers, the whole of society. It's just so important, and I'm sure you've all heard a lot about that recently, whether it's about net zero or 30 by 30. There's a lot of really strong environmental commitments being made, which is great, and we absolutely recognise the role that farming plays in that. Learning from previous schemes, I'm sure everyone has views, good and bad, about countryside stewardship and the schemes that have come before them. We want to build on those schemes, so recognising that they've offered a relatively good return on investment compared to other schemes across Europe. There's still been some major issues, so things around kind of prescriptiveness and bureaucracy, sort of holding back innovation. So we'd like to try and look at how that can be improved, taking a lighter touch approach, giving more flexibility, and really tailoring it to make sure that we're delivering against the goals of the 25-year environment plan and achieving our net zero targets. These are the strategic objectives for our environmental land management schemes. So it's about securing positive environmental benefits, prioritising between those public goods I talked about before, where it's necessary to do so, and also helping to tackle some of the environmental challenges associated with agriculture and how we can address those in the short term. These are the 3 future schemes. So hopefully everyone's heard a bit more about the Sustainable Farming Incentive in recent weeks, and I'll briefly mention that a bit more in the moment, but that's very much our sort of foundational scheme. So it's about simple actions that we want to get as many farmers as possible doing that can achieve environmental benefits. So things like soil health, hedgerows, you know, those really kind of pillar actions that are so important for as environmentally sustainable farming. Local nature recovery, which is my policy area. So this is really about the right actions in the right places. And as I'm sure you'll all be interested to hear about, it's also about collaboration. So this isn't about my action on my farm is directly contractually linked to your action on your farm. This is about coordination and about planning together, learning together, and ultimately delivering together. We can talk a bit more about that in a bit. It's also linked really closely with the work on local nature recovery strategies. So hopefully some of you are aware with the work that we've been doing with the local nature recovery strategy pilots in Cumbria, Northumberland, Cornwall, Greater Manchester, and Buckinghamshire. So they're coming to a close soon. And I know quite a few facilitation groups have been involved in that, as well as tests and trials as well, which has been really invaluable in contributing to how those are shaped. Finally, landscape and ecosystem recovery is what the 3rd scheme is about. So we're talking there about long-term land use change. So it's about restoring wild landscapes in places where that's appropriate, large-scale tree planting, peatland restoration, salt mass restoration projects. So things where you can deliver a wide variety of environmental outcomes whilst contributing to these really high-profile national targets around things like net zero. More detail on this is also out in the agricultural transition plan. So this is just a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but do go there for a bit more information. I mentioned the Sustainable Farming Incentive, or SFI. So expressions of interest for the first phase of the pilot have closed, I think, in the past 2 weeks. So hopefully that's all come across everyone's radar. So that is based on a standards approach. So 8 standards in the first phase of piloting, with 3 levels of ambition per standards. So just for reference, those 8 standards are arable and horticultural soils, improved grassland soils, improved grassland, low and no input grassland, arable land, and hedgerows, on-farm woodland, and water body buffering. And then all those levels of ambition go above and beyond statutory requirements. So they're introductory, intermediate, and advanced levels. And as I've said there, we expect that the first SFI pilot agreements will go live from October this year, and we'll keep evolving that as we go. I'm not going to talk about tests and trials because you've got Louise, who's coming up next, who will talk a lot more about them. But just to say that if any of you are involved in them, it's been absolutely brilliant to get the outputs of those from tests and trials. It's so amazing to see, particularly, you know, so my areas are particularly around spatial prioritization and collaboration, and we've learned so much about how groups of land managers work together, and also how they can come together to deliver on developing local priorities for their areas. And that's been really useful. So we're doing some work at the moment looking at how that can dovetail with local nature recovery strategies and really inform that learning. So if anyone on the call is involved in those, we really appreciate that. Briefly, just on piloting, these are the dates that we have for the proposed pilots. So as I mentioned, the Sustainable Farming Incentive from October 2021, local nature recovery pilot from mid-2022. So we will provide more information on that later this year. And then the landscape recovery pilot, which is about some large land use change projects starting from 2022. Finally, just a bit of a plug for Countryside Stewardship, which I'm sure lots of you will be part of already. But just to reiterate that CS remains open to new applicants until 2023. Hopefully you're all aware there's lots of really positive changes that are being made to CS to make it better. So it's continually under review. Simplified CS options are now available, and I think it's looking really good. So it is absolutely the best way to prepare for future environmental land management schemes is to go into countryside stewardship. And as I've said, there are agreed exit points for anyone who secures a new a place in the new schemes. Just a bit about the broader context. So we have these environmental schemes, but recognizing that the industry is obviously undergoing a huge change over the course of this transition period, we have put other help and support in place to help people to get their businesses ready. So the Farming Investment Fund is about targeted support for investment in equipment, technology and infrastructure to improve productivity and benefit the environment. Farm Resilience is about funding for farmers to access specialist trusted support. We've got the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway, which is about investing in improved animal health and welfare as we strengthen the regulatory baseline and improve consumer transparency. Innovation, research and development. So this is an ongoing point that we're increasing investment in innovation and research and development schemes that bring together researchers, farmers and other agri-food businesses to sort of harness that science and deliver more practical and sort of innovative solutions to some of the challenges we have at the moment. There is a slurry investment scheme, which is about providing grant funding for new slurry stores and equipment to protect the environment in ways that exceed current regulatory requirements. And finally, and I think quite excitingly, it's support for new entrants. So funding to create really strong, positive, future-proofed opportunities for new entrants to access land, infrastructure and support to establish successful and innovative businesses, working particularly with council farms and other landowners. So I just wanted to finish by talking about collaboration, which is really important to me and really important to all of you, I'm sure. So based on the evidence from the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund and also our many tests and trials, we're really conscious that collaboration is key to delivering on so many of our environmental ambitions. It's not just about delivering outcomes across holdings, but just generally the sort of intangible benefits that you get from groups of land managers coming together and sharing their knowledge and building connections. That is really difficult to measure. I appreciate Brian has a difficult job in that regard, but we really believe that that's a positive thing that we should continue to support. So we want to continue to build on the work of the CSFF to help land managers to learn, plan and deliver together. So we're looking at what the Facilitation Fund pays for currently, whether that needs any changes. So things around, one thing that comes up a lot when I talk to farmers is about one-to-one advice, for example. So we're looking at, is that a possibility where there's a wider public benefit, for example, where someone's trying to build an individual agreement based on group priorities. So we're looking at that. Things like the costs associated with working together and also training as well. So I know there will be many views on CSFF, many of which will have been shared with Brian, but really keen to hear your views on what's good, what we should keep, and what we can improve on or do differently. And then finally, this is how you can stay involved. So the way that we are designing schemes is based on co-design. So we work with lots of stakeholders, both at sort of the strategic stakeholder level, so whether that's NFU, CLA, Wildlife Trust, kind of very much across the agri-environment spectrum. But we also have obviously our test and trials program. We have lots of groups of farmers that we work with as well. Sort of pre-pandemic, I think I spent half my life on a train going to farms up and down the country. I'm looking forward to getting back to that. If I'm honest, there's nothing quite beats the being on the ground. But these are the ways that you can stay up to date with what we're doing. So there's a future farming blog. I think there's actually a new podcast that one of our directors has done about regenerative agriculture that's gone online in the past couple of days. And there's also the Defra e-alert system, which will keep you up to date as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Great, so that's it from me. I don't know, Liz and Anne, whether you want me to look at questions now or whether hand over to Louise and go to the end.
It's Brian. I think we'll just take the questions and accumulated commentary after Louise has spoken. But thanks very much. There's some really interesting detail in there, and generally interested in the proposed pilots and the simplified countryside stewardship options and how they play out. But we'll leave that for others to contribute to. Louise, can I call on you now to step up?
You can. Hello, Brian, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me here today to talk about test and trials. Now, I'm just going to share my screen with you all so you can see, not that one, my presentation. One moment. There we go. So I hope everybody can see the screen. Great. Hopefully everybody can see that. So yeah, my name is Louise Maguire. I think I've probably met some of you before. I know there's a lot of you involved in the test and trials that we've got up and running, which is absolutely brilliant. But I know there's some of you that's newer to test and trials. So my first slide just takes you through what are tests and trials, just for those of you that are perhaps a little bit newer to the approach. So test and trials was set up way back in 2018, and it was set up to co-design and test how potential elements of the new scheme work in a real life environment. So working on the ground with farmers, with land managers across different geographies, different sectors, to understand how environmental land management would work. It was a great space for us to engage with the farming community, with you guys that's going to use our schemes, but also test and trials was a safe space for us to fail, learn and improve. So if things didn't quite work in the way we'd hoped, that didn't matter, as long as we learned from why they didn't work and built that into the new scheme.
Louise, sorry to interrupt. We were just wondering if you could share your screen as a full screen, please.
Okay, no problem.
Small at the moment.
Let me try and do that. Is that better?
Yeah, it is for me. But is that okay? Everyone on the chat? Is that better? Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I hope that's better. And I will try and we will send out the presentation out, I hope, but I can voice over the most of the slides. I will skim over a lot of this, but hopefully it will make sense what I'm saying. So test and trials, that's what we're having, provides us with real-time information, learning that we then share with policy teams, with people like Ellen, who we've just heard from, and it helps them to design policy and the delivery framework. Test and trials will help us to design the pilots of the new schemes, but also they will continue beyond the pilots as well, because there'll always be elements that we need to refine and test to understand how they work in practice. So where are we at the moment with test and trials? We have 79 tests and trials. Ellen showed you on the slide before the key learning areas that we're looking at. So from the 6 are displayed, I'm going to go into more detail on those in a moment. We've got 25 that have already complete, and we've disseminated the evidence already from those tests and trials to policy and delivery teams. And we have a further 15 proposals still in development from phase 2 that we're working with, that are being slightly delayed due to COVID-19, but we are still working with those farmers involved in those to develop those proposals into tests and trials. I also should mention that most of you may be familiar that we've just had a new call for proposals which closed on the 30th of April. That was particularly focused on mechanisms looking to achieve landscape recovery. So you will hear more about that in the future, but we're hoping that we'll be able to let you know the outcome of that call in June. So let me just try and move my slide on. So test and trials with CSRF groups. So we've engaged with Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund groups in 2 ways, through tests and trials themselves, and I know a number of you have tests and trials and are working with us on different tests and trials, but we've also had a series of workshops, and some of you may have participated in those. The reason for those workshops is there's perhaps standalone topics where we didn't need to have a standalone test or trial, but it's useful to engage with a wide range of farmers to hear your thoughts, suggestions and ideas, not working through intermediary organisations as we sometimes do with the tests and trials. So we've had 4 rounds to date, looking at a vaster range of topics as we see on the slide, with around 350 farmers that have participated in those workshops, and they've been a real source of evidence for us to help on particular policy issues that we wanted to share and get your thoughts on, and we hope to do much more of those in the future. We are working with the policy teams to look at those. So I thought it might be useful to take you through some of the key findings from the tests and trials. So what's the work that you guys have been involved with? How has it helped us, and how has it helped us to help inform policy? So what I've done is looked at the themes in terms of the 6 thematic priorities. So I'll go through those very quickly. So payments, a lot of the tests and trials looking at payments are still ongoing and are still in very early stages. A lot of them are exploring different cost mechanisms and alternative approaches to income foregone plus costs, the methodology that we've seen through Countryside Stewardship. A lot of them have come up with approaches and are now testing them with farmers to understand what they'll look like. So we hope to report on those in the future. But the general finding that we find is that income foregone plus costs is continually considered to be a weak financial incentive. So this work looking at exploring alternative approaches is a really important piece of work that those tests and trials are looking at. We have already received a range of different payment rates that are generally typically higher than those that we've seen in Countryside Stewardship. And we've also tested payment by results approach with farmers. There's a mixed picture in terms of payment by results and what farmers think. The farmers that have been involved in the trials themselves that we've had in North Yorkshire and East Anglia have really, really enjoyed participating in those trials and have got a lot out of them and really like the approach. Innovative delivery solutions looks at things, is a space for us to trial things that we perhaps haven't tested in current agri-environment schemes to understand how they work in practice. So things that we're looking at is innovative payment approaches like payment by results that I've just touched on, but also things like reverse auctions as well. Again, a lot of those trials are in their very early stages, but we've already collated some great learning in terms of how they've been getting on. We've found that on the ground to set them up, there's a lot of comms that need to go into place to actually communications, handling the communication, getting the right communications right is really important when we have reverse auctions, and making sure there's no conflicting regulatory requirements. If we're going to have an auction, have we checked with all the relevant partners to make sure that everybody's able to participate in that reverse auction. So really interesting things coming through, and I think more to come in the future from innovative delivery solutions. So our third theme is collaboration and how farmers work together. So what we found through tests and trials is that farmers prefer to work together in a bottom-up way where facilitators play a supportive role. We've found that tools such as digital mapping and apps can be really useful tools in supporting that collaboration and bring farmers together. We've also found that financial support is a really key incentive, but we haven't came across a single mechanism in terms of how that financial support should be delivered. Some of our tests have found that that could be delivered in different ways. So farmers that don't participate in collaboration is a major barrier to some other farmers getting involved, and some leading some to actually call for enforcement measures. And peer-to-peer approaches have been, farmers have really felt that really engaging, where farmers have came along and got each other together. Our fourth theme is looking at spatial prioritisation, and essentially what we mean by this is how we determine local priorities. So farmers, and what we've done through a number of tests and trials is looked at how we determine priorities at a number of different spatial scales. So it might be at a catchment scale, at a landscape scale. What we've found through all the tests and trials that we've got looking at this is that farmers really want to be there at the table when we're looking at local priorities and how they can be defined. They want to be involved in the discussions and on the decisions in local priorities. We've found that if there are existing partnerships and networks, it can streamline the prioritisation process. So things like the Countryside Facilitation Fund groups, if they're already up and running, it really helps support that process. There's no consensus in terms of the scale. Would it be better at one scale rather than another? There's mixed feedback on how that works. And we are looking at digital platforms and how that helps different groups to spatially prioritise. And we come in with a few suggested options from the tests and trials about how that might work that we are working closely with Ellen's team to test. There is some support for local boards comprised of local farmers, land managers and other key stakeholders that could have a key role in defining like local priorities. And we've got a test of trial in East Anglia looking at that and how that might work in a level of detail. Moving on to our final two themes and the key findings that we've got to date. So the fifth one is the land management plan, and this is where the majority of our test and trials are and are looking at. So a lot of farmers are working with us to co-design what a land management plan would look like in a level of detail. And so far from all those tests and trials, we've received 13 templates about what that might look like. I'm going to go into talk about that in a bit more detail on the next slide, but there has been much support for the land management plan. The majority of farmers that have been involved in these tests and trials really like the idea of the land management plan. Some farmers do see a role for business planning alongside looking at the environmental objectives and actions that they can deliver on the farm. We are looking at short rotation tenancies and crop rotation to see what the role of digital land management plans and apps can do in enabling regular updates given the different issues that those sectors face. And we are also looking at earned recognition in terms of the land management plan. Moving on in terms of advice and guidance, it's very clear from the tests and trials that we've got up and running and those working with farmers and land managers on designing a land management plan that farmers value the reassurance an advisor can provide during the process of developing a land management plan. However, what we've seen is that once they've been shown the process and once they've gone through that land management plan, land managers, farmers feel much more comfortable in understanding the land management plan and what needs to be delivered where. So there are mixed views on whether advisors need to be certified, with some land managers expressing concerns regarding the cost and bureaucracy and extent to which certification could guarantee knowledge. And there is definitely an interest, again, in peer-to-peer learning, similar to what we've seen in collaboration, where farmers have came together to develop land management plans once they've had that initial input from an advisor, which has worked really well. So I just thought I'd take this opportunity to dive into a little bit more detail about the land management plan, because this is probably where we've had most of the evidence to date. So we've, as I said on the previous slide, we've received 13 templates. So some of the common factors that we've seen coming across in the land management plans that we've had is basic farm details, an environmental baseline at the start, an assessment of the environmental goods that can be delivered and what the aspirations and opportunities are for that particular farm. The format of the templates that we've got really varies. We've got 5 templates are designed that are just simply text-based, while others make use of visual elements such as tables or graphs to bring the land management plan to life a little bit. We find that a common theme is tables. A lot of the templates that we've seen, the majority of templates use tables to break up the land management plan and use it as a simple, clear way of setting out the information. And also what we've seen is mapping is a critical part of the land management plan, and each of the templates that we've seen includes a map. And the most important part of that map being that it looks at the environmental delivery that's already been made on that farm. So it doesn't just pick up, right, what can be delivered from here, it looks at what has already been delivered. So 10 of the 13 templates that we've got gather some background information on the holding of the farm itself. So this includes income level data and farm business SWOT analysis, and looking at the whole holding and the farm business and what it can deliver. So not just at environmental level. So we've seen some, we've definitely seen an appetite for looking at land management plans in a holistic way that can be used on farm. So that's where we've got to in terms of land management plans and where we're up to. Land management plans, as we've seen as well, can be used to form a catchment-based plan or a landscape scale plan, and we've seen 2 different approaches with that. One, a top-down approach, and second, a bottom-up approach. And I just wanted to talk through 2 examples that we've got working with CSFF groups that have looked at that. We've got one with Aquila Mia farmers that have looked at one doing land management plans, but then how they could be corralled into a landscape scale plan. And then we've also worked with North Cumbrian farmers up in the Forgotten Lands, working with 20 farmers, looking at land management plans and the advice and guidance and support they would need. And interim findings indicate that group would require guidance and support to access that mapping information on individual farms. So again, we can see the importance of mapping. Just going on to my final couple of slides, I have got a video that I thought might be really helpful, but I'll play that at the end to show you. That what might be useful is just to show you in terms of the schemes, how we think the findings from land management plan theme in particular is helping the themes. So we're working closely with the team working on the pilot of the sustainable farming incentive to understand how we will look at land management plans. But what we can say is there's agreement amongst farmers that the LMP would be helpful, and that there's value in establishing that environmental baseline, and that it's a useful tool to refer to when deciding which standards to apply for. So that's what we've heard so far when we've looked at the sustainable farming incentive. In terms of local nature recovery and the land management plan, we know that there are multiple tests and trials that have confirmed that the LMP is a useful tool for both incentivising and for developing, understanding and incentivising landscape scale collaboration. They have reported this help see their hold in the context of a bigger picture, and we've seen how really digital mapping tools are really important to that process. Final slide, just in terms of how we report and monitor. what we get from the tests and trials. So we have various mechanisms in place to cascade the findings that we've got from tests and trials. So we do it on a monthly basis with policy teams, but externally look out for things on gov.uk. So we have a regular evidence report that summarises all the progress and key findings from our live tests and trials. We're just preparing the next one now, which will be published on gov.uk once that is signed off. We also have interim and final reports that's produced by each of the individual tests and trials. But we also have different mechanisms in place to cascade the findings. So we have what we call thematic working groups as well, that's set up to share feedback across people that's involved in tests and trials, but also with policy teams. So we've got a number of different ways to highlight, showcase and cascade and discuss the findings that's coming through the tests and trials. And I think that's my final slide there. What I can do, if people would find it helpful, is that I can show you this little video. It's basically a farmer that has been involved in land management planning. Brian, do we have enough time for the video?
Yeah, I think that's great, Louise. Don't worry.
Thank you. I won't be a moment. I'll just share my screen with you so you can see the video. So I'm just going to play. Hopefully everybody can hear it.
Tests and trials were great to be involved with, very useful for me as a farmer and also someone who's interested in conservation, to begin to learn which direction the future of stewardship might head in. The next phase of government funded incentives for rural management, it gave me the opportunity to discuss ideas about land management plans, how to identify what I've got, and how do I perhaps help others. It would be really good to be able to collaborate, to work together with neighbours, to protect watercourses, for example. The test and trials process was well planned. It helped me learn more about the direction Defra want to go in terms of payment for public goods.
The idea of the land management plan will be to capture every article of our natural capital. Our natural capital at Preston ranges from ridge and furrow pastures to the old steading, to farmland birds, to the watercourses, to on-farm woodlands, to the historic Preston Tower dating back from Border Reaver times in the late 1400s. So I'm standing in a now slightly decaying wild bird feeding strip area. We've had frost and snow in the last few days and it's losing its grain value, but it'll still be good cover for another month. This habitat is very easy to replicate and makes a real difference to farmland birds, be it yellowhammers, bramblings, grey partridges. We have 4 of the 5 target red list species birds at Preston Mains, and I'll do everything I can to look after them and to nurture our natural capital.
Trees are an exceedingly important part of each land management plan. My theory about a land management plan is that it is a snapshot of everything on a holding, be it water, be it soil, be it air, be it trees, be it woodland, be it wetland, be it wildlife. Once that snapshot's been precisely measured, taken, assessed, one can then select ELM options that might enhance or encourage further additions of natural capital. The tree behind us is a roosting point and a breeding point for barn owls. It was damaged in the wind 3 years ago, so I've engaged a tree surgeon to rebalance it by basically cutting one side back. This is the Banks field at Preston Mains Farm, a perfect site for woodland creation. There are springs, there's runoff water, there's open ground. As long as I get the right tree in the right place, alder, hazel, oak, willow, I can make this a super habitat for new trees to help suck up carbon dioxide, as well as taking up some land that is not particularly good for farming. The new wood in the Banks field will really make a difference. It's something I'm very much hoping to do under my natural capital plan.
This field is where the Tuggle Burn starts, with land drainage behind us, and then these wet areas of the Tuggle Burn. It then goes to those rails in between the 2 woods, Steelbank and Wedding Wood, and it's there where it's habitat value reduces because of the trees that we see also on film here. One of my aspirations is to reduce the tree cover and improve the habitat value. It's not a good place for trees. We have other places very good for trees on our farm. This is my favourite field on our 600 acres. Wet, muddy areas that the lapwings like so very much when they arrive. The lapwings will be here usually about the 25th of March is when they arrive from coastal roosting areas to begin thinking about setting nests. And my aspiration is to continue to manage the field in this way, and I will do everything I can to do so. I want to make more of the roadside runoff water by creating silt trap ponds that will make more wet areas in the slacks. Right in front of me is a pipe where the watercourse drain was piped. I want to open that out in 3 sections to make mini ponds and make this a way to heaven. So this is the Tuggle Burn, and one of my aspirations that I will list in my land management plan is to clear out the trees on either side of the Tuggle Burn so that it gets full sunshine and it becomes a better habitat. At present, the stream is dark and dingy and doesn't get enough sunlight. The trees were planted by my grandfather because that was what he was encouraged to do. But we want to make it a better habitat by getting rid of the tree cover. This is the other side of the bridge. This is the Tuggle Burn with conifers on the other side rather than old deteriorating broadleaves. But equally, the trees need to be removed so the watercourse can receive sunshine and become a much better habitat than it is now. At the moment it's dark and is really only welcoming to pigeons, and it's of not much value to the farm's environmental value.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm here with Ellen to take any questions.
Thanks, Louise. That was brilliant. And yeah, thanks to Harry also for his film appearance there. That really brought things to life hugely. Nice to see some real farming activity. And good luck with Harry's Way to Heaven. Hopefully that will be something we can come back to in a couple of years and see how it's going. But there's some really good stuff in there, Louise. Thank you very much. I'm particularly excited by the fact that tests and trials will continue, so that ongoing learning and development and learning from doing is going to be a part of how we proceed. And I'm sure there's a lot of other things in there, but the collaboration aspect and the recognition of tech and how we use that to help both measure and record and also show how it is genuinely exciting. And that's one of the things I'll be looking at in the next phase of the monitoring for the facilitation fund. So good to have that, and be good to sort of come back to you on it. So I think now we're going to move on to Q&A. Hopefully Anne and Liz have been able to corral the numbers of questions that come in. I've noticed that there's some questions in the chat and some questions in the Q&A part of this. So Anne and Liz, you might have to jump between the two things to pick out the relevant question to put to Louise and Ellen. So if you're ready and we have a bank of questions to be sent across to Louise and Ellen, let's get on with it. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, thanks, Louise and Ellen. They were fantastic talks. Yeah, just bear with us while we do go through some of the questions. As I say, I'm going to have to flick between the chat and the Q&A, which is fine. But one of the first questions that has come up is, it would be great to know what groups of landowners managers can do to prepare for ELM and more collaborative working, e.g. group mapping, surveys, networking, etc. So have you got any advice about how people can start to think about transitioning towards ELM?
Shall I take that one, Louise? Yeah, really, really great question. I think being in a collaborative group already is the first step in the right direction. So obviously brilliant that so many more people are looking at CSFF. I think anything that sort of where you can get together and look at sort of the environmental challenges in your area and kind of come to some agreement on what you think they are and potential options for tackling them, I think is really positive. So I think some people mentioned things around natural capital mapping and baseline mapping. I think all of that is really helpful. It's about understanding collectively at your landscape scale sort of what you have to offer in future schemes. So then it's things like looking into tests and trials. Is it something that is that might be right for you? Looking ahead, so we've got the pilots coming up as well, which are going to be really exciting. So just thinking really about what are your options, what might you want to do in future schemes, and then engaging with us as well, whether that's so we do a lot of work with groups like yours. So if you want one of us to come along and have a chat and discuss these things, we're really happy to do that. So just engaging and keeping talking and thinking about what you can do on your land in the future.
Louise, do you want to add anything, or you? Okay, I guess a sort of related question on that is, how will land management plans account for and give it credit to farmers that have already been in HLS for many years? So perhaps, you know, people have done a lot of work already. How will they be rewarded going forward into ELM?
So just as a kind of a general point, maintenance of existing sort of work that's been done under schemes is absolutely critical. So maintenance of those existing public goods. So rolling over HLS agreements where that's right for you to do so. And I'm sure you'll be sort of engaging with Natural England to discuss that. And then we want to make it a smooth transition for you to enter. So probably around HLS, you're probably thinking, well, you're probably more in the local nature recovery space or even landscape recovery, depending on scale and level of ambition. But it absolutely about maintenance of existing public goods is completely critical. I don't know whether, Louise, you want to say anything more about the land management plans on that aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's been a key role, thanks Ellen, a key role of the land management plans and the work that we've been doing through tests and trials, to where farmers have mapped out both work that's been done already, and some of it, some people have been in environmental, previous agri-environment schemes and others haven't, but they've been able to demarcate where they've done work already to build on that maintenance, but also where, you know, there's aspirations and potential where they can build on what's already been done, and if they use land management plans for their vehicle to do that.
Okay, I've got another sort of similar related question here from Alex Norman. Will farmers and landowners still be rewarded for their efforts towards achieving environmental outcomes if the outcome isn't achieved through no fault of their own?
It's a really good question. I guess this comes back to some of what Louise talked about in terms of payment by results. So I assume that's what prompted that question. But yeah, our intention is particularly looking at, you know, where the industry is at the moment. We recognise that certainty is really important. So at the moment, we're paying for what people do as opposed to what the outcome is. But there's a balance in that, right? Because we don't want to be too prescriptive as well. So if anyone's had an opportunity to look at the simplified CS options, you can see how they kind of set out what they're trying to achieve, what the option is trying to achieve, and looking to try and monitor against that where we can. But noting, yeah, you know, sometimes for whatever reason, you know, the environment isn't, you know, it's not a manual. You can't always predict the outcome, and we completely appreciate that.
Okay, and another one, I guess, really thinking about how people can get themselves ready for ELM. It's really about the advice around whether people should enter into countryside stewardship schemes now, or should they wait? Should they just hold on?
No. Go into existing schemes now, absolutely. There's lots of opportunities. As I said, CS is evolving and getting better all the time, and we will have options for people to break those agreements and come into environmental land management schemes when it's right for them to do so. So if you go into CS now and then in 2024 you secure an ELM agreement, you'll be able to break that CS agreement.
Okay, there's some questions around the SFI, so the Sustainable Farming Incentive. There's some queries about the payments that they may be under review currently, and also what are those payments structured to reward, priority habitat, priority species. You know, what are the payments around that, and what's the sort of aim of the SFI?
So the SFI, there's actually quite a bit of information on gov.uk about the SFI at the moment, because we're rolling out the SFI pilot. So that's your best sort of source of information. I think, as I said earlier, it's very much about that kind of foundational work. So soil health, particularly is one that I think I mentioned quite a bit earlier. You know, it underpins everything. So it's that kind of base layer of things that you want to build on. So probably if you're in an agreement, a countryside stewardship already, you're probably doing quite a bit of that already. So that might be something that's quite makes sense for you to go into. In addition to local nature recovery or on its own. Yeah, and then on as it relates to payment rates and things like that, I wouldn't want to speak out of turn. I'd go on gov.uk because the information is being published there.
Okay, there's also questions about whether or not where the sort of schemes sit within the whole of ELM. So is it likely that the SFI can be combined with the local nature recovery element, or is it that they're going to be entirely separate and you're expected to go into one and perhaps the others are off? You're not able to enter into them.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So for the SFI pilot, you can't have an SFI and CS agreement on the same parcel. But for the schemes in full rollout, we are considering the interaction between them. And we want to explore this through working with farmers through our tests and trials and piloting how you can have, for example, an SFI and local nature recovery agreements on the same parcel. Should they even be different agreements? You know, these are things that we need to work through through piloting to make sure that we keep it as simple as possible for land managers. We obviously need to avoid double funding as well. So we're looking at how that can be achieved. So all things to be worked through.
Louise, did you want to come in there?
No, I think Ellen's answered that. Thank you, Ellen. Okay.
Okay, there's some questions around the tests and trials, I think, for you, Louise. So I've got one here. The reports from each T&T sound very interesting and useful. Are they publicly available? If so, where?
They are. I've seen that question coming on the live questions. So yes, they are publicly available. We've made some of them available on gov.uk, but we share all of them on our Microsoft Teams site. Now, it does sound complex, but if you can send me your email address, I can make sure you're added, and I can send out the link to gov.uk where we've got the reports on. So I can send out those links so people have got those.
Yes, please, if you would. I think that'd be really useful. I think there's a lot of people that would be interested in having those. So if you can send them, again, we can send them out with the rest of the information when we send the links for the recording. So we can try and sort all of that out. Sorry, I'll just skip through the Q&As again. It keeps moving every time I go.
It does. And I noticed a question. There's a question on private sector finance and how we testing that through tests and trials. So yes, that is a key element that we're looking at through tests and trials to understand how we might be able to blend public and private sector finance. So we have got a couple of tests and trials that are looking at different approaches. Perhaps we've got one that's testing a carbon credit scheme and how that might work. But we've got a couple of tests and trials. It's also a key focus. I mentioned right at the top of my presentation that we issued a call that's now closed for landscape recovery, and one of those things that we were interested in is looking at mechanisms in which we can blend public and private finance, and that's one of the key things that we're looking to do further tests and trials on, if we have some really good ideas and suggestions to look at that.
Yeah, I will say that our next webinar on the 20th of May, we will be looking at some of that. So we will be looking at green finance and private investment and how that might combine with ELM. So again, if you're interested in that, tune in. It's going to be on the 20th of May. there was just a comment that popped up, I think, in the chat then when you were speaking, Louise, that I thought I would just try to get to. So just bear with me while I flip screens. Says Louise has a potential confusion on the payment structure within the levels of ambition being clarified, please. I.e., was there an intention that payments would be cumulative, as was indicated from our session on soil standards?
So that's a really good question that we received last week that we are seeking clarification with. So I will definitely come back to the team unless Ellen knows any different, but as Ellen concentrates on LNR, the question was, just so that everybody's clear, is that we were talking to some of the farmers engaged in test and trials and looking at the amounts that's published on gov.uk, and you can see at the different levels of ambition there were different funding allocated, and it wasn't clear whether that was cumulative or whether it was just what you would get if you went into that level. So I will make sure that we get that clarity out. So I'll send that out as well as the links.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Just scroll through these. I wanted to move on to advice, really, and there was a really good question on advice. Right, before I move on to that and pick it out, there's one here. Any update on whether CS facilitation funding will be available for farm cluster groups next year? Our current funding via the SDNP runs out at the end of this year, and we are keen to renew to continue the cluster work. Is anybody aware?
As Brian, we're hopeful that there will be further funding announced as soon, but nothing has been signed off as yet. So I think that's one to watch and have fingers crossed for. Probably the best I can say for now. Okay,
thanks, Brian. Yeah, so a very interesting question here about the advice sector and what may be required. So does the panel feel that the agricultural industry has sufficient skills capacity with the required advisors to set up land management plans and also to monitor outcomes to earn ELMs? Ellen, do you want to?
I was going to say, I'd really think that's a question I'd like to know what whoever asked it thinks. That felt like a bit of a leading question. I'd really like to know. I don't know if Louise has a different response, but I mean, as the agricultural sector, I'd like to know what you think.
And whilst we may get a response, but I'll just come in while people's thinking about that question that Ellen's posed to you guys. So I think through test and trials, we're coming up with some really good information that we share. So we have got a team looking at the level of advice that might be required across each of the 3 schemes, but also the guidance. And the farmers that have been working on the land management plans, and we've got some tests that are testing, can a land management plan be done with advice and without advice, what level of advice is needed, and that's been, and is that advice certified, what type of advice is that? And that's been really helpful for the advice and guidance team to form views in terms of what advice is needed.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Want to try again. We had some questions submitted prior to our event from people. So if I may just try and turn to some of those. Again, this is linked really to advice. A question here from Andy Dyer from the Eden Rivers Trust. When can we expect to be informed about who constitutes a trusted partner or individual for assisting farmers, landowners in completing any land management plans? And what qualifications, prior experience do Defra envisage will be required or desirable for these trusted partners or individuals?
I'm not quite sure where that question comes from. That felt like it might have been quoting from a document, but I wasn't sure what. I don't know, Louise, if you have any insights on that one.
So I think in terms of advice, we are looking at how we test the land management plan through the Sustainable Farming Incentive pilot. So we're working very closely with the pilot team on that to look at the templates that we've developed through tests and trials to understand how we can test them through that pilot and what level of advice might be needed to test them. So I think it's all work in progress in terms of looking at that at the moment and how we test it through the SFI pilot.
I think there are question marks, aren't there, over who are the right people to deliver the advice, and what's the sort of accreditation? I think you've sort of touched on that, and I think that's where that question is coming from. Who are the people that are able to deliver that advice? And I think it's something for facilitation groups really as well to think about. We, as a kind of network, a loose network, again, it's something that we want to explore through these webinars, is what accreditation do we already have? And I don't know if Brian wants to come in on this at this point, but there is that thinking that through facilitation groups, we're delivering an awful lot of advice. Are we the right people to continue to deliver that advice? And do we have the knowledge and the skills to be able to deliver all of that advice? Brian, I kind of want to refer to you, I think, as well.
That's fine. I'm not sure how full I can answer that question, but I'll give it a go. So where we are currently is a really interesting place where you've got the combination of advice around good quality agricultural production alongside ecological restorations coming together to create the focus that we have, which is really exciting. And I think if you like, that sort of change in agricultural advice and environmental advice needs to somehow fuse and sort of come together in a way that helps to channel things in a sort of in a constructive way rather than things conflicting, which it might have done in the past. So as part of if you like, the evolution of what we've been doing with the Facilitation Fund and how that has brought something new into the farm advice arena, is helping to inform and possibly contribute to how that wider package on farm advice goes forward. So there's a live discussion taking place now across Defra bodies around how that farm advice is delivered. And I think that sort of a shared agenda, the agroecological approach, the need to do things more around resource management and looking at natural capital provides a sort of a sort of really interesting lens to look through how that can be applied. So again, it's work in progress. There might be some real opportunities to use that as a way to project out back into the if you like, the providers of education, like the agricultural colleges and others, to find a way to give some legs and some substance to how that then sort of develops. Some things that are already underway to help do that. So we've been looking at farmer-led initiatives and how we might be able to collaborate around innovation and so forth. So it's a live, hot debate, and I think a real opportunity as we step up to look at natural capital as an approach, how we use land management and sort of resource recovery to mitigate the impacts of climate change and various other things that we're facing. So it is a genuinely interesting area, and I don't think the current sort of structures are doing that in quite the right way we need it to for the future. But certainly the learning from the Facilitation Fund and all the other stuff that's going on is helping to shape how that future farm advice might progress. Does that help?
It does, Brian. Thank you very much. So I'm just trying to scan through more of the questions and comments, flitting between screens. If you just don't mind bearing with me. So there's a question here from a small organic livestock farmer who has done many things which we are now being asked to do, such as lots of hedgerows, small blocks of, oh, sorry, my screen is moving. Small blocks of woodland, linking habitats, protecting surface water, permanent pasture. It seems that work done may not be rewarded on new scheme. So again, it comes back to that question. People are concerned that they're doing lots of things and the reward simply isn't there perhaps going forward.
Yeah, that's definitely not the case. I mean, we definitely, I think, from conservation perspective, you know, conserving existing environmental goods is absolutely critical, and absolutely something like maintenance of existing goods is absolutely something that we are looking to reward in new schemes.
I suppose it'd be interesting to explore that a little bit more about what do Defra hope to achieve from the new scheme? What are their objectives? What do they? Something I suppose I'm keen to understand as well is, what do you see a future farm to look like? What's the hope going forward? We've got a lot of hope pinned on the new scheme and how transformational it could be and what it could do. So what's the sort of vision that Defra has for a future farming?
Gosh, that is a big question. There's a lot in that. So firstly, I mean, environmental land management, all future schemes are voluntary. So I'll just say that. So it's not that we're going to be, you know, forcing people into them. But that said, we really hope that through working with stakeholders and farmers and tests and trials and through our piloting, that we design schemes that farmers and other land managers really, really want to take part in. So sustainable farming incentive, we're really hoping that you know, is really quite high uptake, because those are things in there that really contribute to environmentally sustainable farming. So like some of the points that the questioner before mentioned they already do on farm, like that's brilliant. Of course, it's really important that we'd like to see more farms driving towards those kind of really critical sort of baseline environmental benefits alongside farming. And then, so I think I kind of set out at the start what we're trying to achieve. So our strategic objectives are around a range of positive environmental benefits, prioritizing between environmental outcomes where necessary. So we take our lead from the 25-year environment plan and other government objectives like net zero, and really recognizing, you know, 70% of the country is farmed. So farmers have an absolutely critical role to play in achieving those. And also starting to mitigate, to the extent that they haven't been already, sort of the negative environmental impacts associated with agriculture. So I think there's options based on what farmers are looking to do. So some farmers might say, you know, I might only want to do SFI because I want to focus on growing my farm business. That's fine. For other people, it might be, you know, I'm really interested in working with some of my neighbours to do some water buffering or, you know, a wildlife corridor. You know, loads of options there. Maybe they want to go it alone because none of the farmers around them are interested in doing that. So we'll have options for everyone. And then landscape recovery is about that sort of that long-term land use change. So maybe you've got sort of, you've come together with a group of farmers and you know that between you there's enough sort of maybe unproductive areas of farms that, you know, you think actually we could do a really exciting project here. So options for everyone. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, Louise.
No, that was a really comprehensive answer, Ellen, but and indeed that's why we've developed the Future Farming Programme, because it recognises that Defra wants to encourage sustainable farm businesses going ahead in the future. Yes, environmental land management forms a key part of that, and farmers being able to choose the level of environmental objectives that they deliver on their land. But we recognise as well that there's a suite of different things that we can support farmers to do, and I know we've talked about some in terms of the other grants and the investments that the funds that's going to be available through the wider programme. So I think that's what Defra is looking for: sustainable farming businesses, and using the suite of grants and schemes that we're going to have available to make sure that to enable you guys to do that.
Thanks. I've just noticed that John Place has popped up on the presenter screen. John, if there's anything you want to contribute, just please speak, if that's okay.
I will try. Yes, I can't show you my face unfortunately, but yeah, we'll do. But so I'm happy to contribute. But yeah, I mean, I think you know, just echoing the points really. we want to build on what we've got from control stewardship, environmental stewardship, and keep those people in agreements. So I think it is quite important to note.
Lovely, thanks. And you want to go back to the questions and
Yeah, sure. So I guess this is a sort of related question in some ways. So from Sophie Harvey, I'd be really interested to hear your opinions about the balance between yield and environmental benefit linked to the ideas of the percentage self-sufficiency for the UK and the problem of potential decreasing yield, meaning we just import our environmental degradation.
who's up for that one?
That is such a huge question, a really, really important one. I think that's, kind of going back to what I said before, we recognise that, it's about environmental benefits alongside a thriving and resilient farming sector. We do want to keep producing food in the UK. It's not about, suddenly bringing all our beef in from Brazil. That's absolutely not where we want to get to. So it's about recognising as well that in a lot of cases, things like looking after soil underpins productive farming, doesn't it? In the long term, so preserving those benefits for the future. So where are there complementary things we can do? Where are there additional things we can do? I was talking to a farmer in Cumbria just recently, and he said he's a sheep and beef farmer, and he said actually if future schemes allow for it, he could quite happily turn over 20% of his land to do environmental stuff with and not drop his yield. It's just about planning for it. So I'm really hoping to see people looking at their land, as we were talking about earlier, and what they can deliver and how their business models enable for that.
Thanks, Ellen. How are we doing, Ellen? Got plenty more lined up, or are we running out of? And you have to come off mute. Somebody had to do it.
Classic failure. Yes, I'm just trying to scan through. There are quite plenty of questions, and any that we don't pick up, we'll try and answer afterwards and share that as well. Again, there's comments really around the advisory discussions that we had. The advisors must be certificated by a national body, or the outcomes over the UK will vary widely and will be unfair to clusters and nature. There just won't be enough NGO quality advice available, I fear. Again, coming back to that key critical thing, I think, for farmers is to get that advice and how that will be given to them. I guess there are question marks over the role of Natural England to some extent as well. And I'm thinking off the top of my head in terms of advice and some of the, I guess, incidents that I've come across through my own work, and thinking about how we continue or do better in our protection of existing sites. And I think that comes back to the advice, and I think it comes back to those sort of links that we have with different organisations. I don't know if anybody wants to sort of comment on that.
I don't want to stop anybody else commenting, but I picked up from I think it was Alan Johnson's point about the communications and how you provide support materials like the ADHB do for some of the stuff that they provide, and also the accreditation. So this, I think, is one of the things that the Facilitation Fund has brought to the party over the last few years, is that we do an assessment as part of any application to the fund to check the skills, the qualifications, and the experience of potential facilities, to make sure that we're putting the right person in place to provide the training and advice to the group of farmers they work with. And that forms a sort of, I feel like a baseline where we know there's a certain quality across those three criteria that will allow success to be delivered in some way. But on the back of that, there's been some interesting discussions that I mentioned to a few minutes ago about the Farmer-Led Initiatives Network that's been done partly with the Royal Agricultural University, ADHB, and a few other partners, which has been discussing this. And I think, not that we've got the answer just yet, but there's definitely a need to think about that. How do we get this type of approach mainstreamed into educational providers to help provide more opportunities for people to enter into it, and also to give some quality assurance to the level of skills and experience that's been transmitted back out. But as I say, it's really interesting, and it's definitely something we need to look at further.
Okay, I might just try and squeeze some questions around landscape recovery. So any thoughts, Ari? I'm not sure what that means. Second Q, how will ELM's landscape scale development be linked with the nature recovery network mapping being developed by Natural England and at county level mapping?
I can give you an answer on that. I'm heavily involved actually, and with that capturing of what's been done through countryside stewardship with the groups, and how that translates into both priority habitat contributions, and also how it might manifest in the natural capitals typology. So there's really interesting component parts that might take us to how, what that looks like at all scales, from national right down to the individual farm. Interestingly, the data that's behind that is very challenging, because we're probably looking at now is 3 different schemes from the previous agri-environment scheme, countryside stewardship, and what might come with the new scheme coming forward. So there are some complexities around the data, but the work we've done so far in trying to map out how countryside stewardship has been improved and possibly better through the aggregation that group-based approaches provide, is providing sort of, if you like, the detail that helps to inform that. So it is work in progress, but the issues around data, although challenging, I hope that we can overcome. The RPA control the data, and so they need to be part of this too. But I think all the component parts are there to help build that picture. It's just a question of how do we fuse them together in a way that's sensible and accessible for people to use to good effect. So I hope to update on that soon, but as I say, some of the foundation stuff might be in place to help.
And just to add to that, so I think I mentioned earlier that we're really heavily involved in the local nature recovery strategies, which are also about delivering on the nature recovery network. So we have our local conveners in each of those 5 pilot areas, working with some of that mapping and the land managers in those areas, and we're looking from a policy perspective in relation to landscape recovery, sort of how you develop the criteria for those projects that I mentioned earlier, the 10 landscape recovery projects. So criteria around that will be looking at spatial prioritization and what those projects can deliver, both in terms of national strategic objectives, but also the local nature recovery network.
Okay, thanks. Can I completely skip to something very different now, but I think it's an important question to ask, and I know that you've talked about this, but it's related to payments, and I think it's a huge issue. So I know you've talked about it, but what is the thinking for payments and the rates of those payments? Because it's always been on income foregone. How is that? Can you give any reassurance to our facilitation group members and other farmers around the country, really, that they can be truly rewarded for the work that they're going to do?
So I don't lead on payment policy yet, so I think I can take that away. But in the broader sense, we're still developing our approach to payments. So we're working with stakeholders and other users to look at, as Louise had said, so we've got tests and trials looking at a variety of different payment methods. We've certainly heard stakeholders, when you've told us that the current rates aren't sufficient. So in some cases, I think when you look at kind of the distribution of uptake of CS options, some are much higher than others, and that kind of gives an indication of where maybe payment rates are right and maybe where they're wrong. So it is about that balancing act, looking at fairness to farmers and foresters and other land managers, and also securing our environmental objectives, delivering value for money. So very much still a work in progress, but we really value your feedback and your work to help us contribute to that learning as we go along.
Excellent. And Liz, I'm not sure, we're getting to just after 4 o'clock now. I think we're scheduled to finish at 10 past. So I'm not really sure how you want to play it. If you want to ask one or two final questions.
I've got about 2 more minutes, sorry, and I've got to dash.
Well, that might define the art of the possible. Louise, are you hanging around, or are you going to push off in 2 minutes as well?
I can hang around for a bit longer.
Okay. All right. And any last questions that we can put to Louise and Ellen while she's still with us?
I guess, again, it's a question from me really about upland farmers. If it's not too pertinent for me to ask a question, again, it's related to payments, because we know under countryside stewardship that payment rates for the uplands options have always been pretty poor. And I think, again, it comes back to that, what incentive is there for those upland farmers to be truly rewarded for those environmental benefits that they're delivering? They're delivering them already. So can you, again, it's that sort of reassurance I think that people will want, that it's worth their whiles going into these schemes.
Yeah, it's a really pertinent point. We absolutely want to make schemes that are attractive to upland farmers, recognising that upland farmers are in many cases sort of, ideally placed, as you said, to deliver environmental benefits. So John might want to say more about uplands in CS, but we've got lots of upland stakeholders engaged through tests and trials, and also we work with people like Julia Agliombi really quite extensively. So we're hearing the views of uplands farmers all the time. We're really conscious of the issues that they face, and really want to build that benefits to upland farmers into future schemes. So I'm afraid that's all I can say on that particular topic right at this moment, but it's a work in progress. John, were you trying to come in?
I'm John Resources to the ballet class, but I am listening intently. I mean, on the uplands, we have tried to do a little bit more in terms of eligibility for some of the other options under the uplands UP2, I think it is, to make the eligibility broader so people can access a higher payment rate. We also introduced the wood pasture upland options as well, where we reviewed the payment rates and with the help of Julia and others, increased some of the costs for the uplands, to take note of the costs, the added costs in the uplands. We are looking at payment rates now, and we'll see what we can do for CS. I mean, but I think it's sort of a moving picture. But yeah, I think we do recognise that we do need to look at this in more detail. But obviously, we've tried a couple of ways to get more people into agreements. But we'll see what that looks like this year, and also then for next year, see if there's anything more we can do. But I've got some ideas around that, particularly around costs, I suppose, as well. That will be helpful for additional costs in the uplands for some of that, because I think that's where most of the difference might be, because as you know, it's sort of income foregone plus costs, and income foregone doesn't usually sit well with upland farmers, but the costs do. So if we can justify the cost, then I think there are some possibilities of changing the payment rates. Not going to promise on that, but that's sort of where we've been trying to focus to get more people into things like the upland wildlife offer and the intermediate.
Thanks, John. And I think that was pushing into the sort of payment for ecosystem services type of thing that might be fascinating to explore as we go forward. I think we've got time for one last question, if that's okay.
I've got to head off for a 10 past meeting, Brian, but thanks so much everyone for having me along. Really interesting discussion, and I think if it's possible to collate questions, the ones we haven't had time to answer, really happy to take those back into the programme. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Ellen. We'll send you all the hard ones. Okay, cheers. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, I can get one more question. We can squeeze one more in. Are there any barriers for new landowners to take newly purchased land and improve natural restoration, especially if that is their primary goal, not, for example, sheep farming?
Yeah, that's a question that I think we're going to have to take away to properly answer that question, to understand what's going to be available. But yes, let's take that offline if that's okay, please, Anne.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and on CS as well, I think we probably could take it away. But I think I mean the barriers are just general more than what we offer. But I mean, it might be maybe the barriers around about paying enough money for them. But I think it's about their business models now. So how they're going to deliver on the land, everything they want to do with it.
Good stuff. Okay, thanks, John, and thanks, Louise, Anne and Liz for your contributions. I'm going to wrap up now. We're getting close to the 10 past cut-off point. I think Liz, I think you've shared the details for the next webinar, which is on the 20th of May, between 1 and 2:30 on innovative green finance, which will be interesting and good complement to what we've been talking about here today. But just like to thank everybody for their time today, and I think it'll be a really, really good run through from Louise and Ellen, and with John's contributions as well. It makes it a good package. So yeah, thanks everybody. It's been good. We will be sharing the questions and any kind of further dissemination, and we will be keeping the dialogue going as we proceed with the further webinars. So thanks, Anne. Thanks, Liz. Thanks everybody. Have a good afternoon. Cheers.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Louise.